Printer's not working. Okay, I don't have the source sheets ready, but I'll share them right now in the chat. There are two pages, two documents. First is the um, this doc, um, which is now shared in the chat. Okay, and the second is this document here, which I'm sharing now as well. And I will email it to all of you guys here in the room. So if you want to follow, you can just have it, so you'll have it. Um, okay. And okay. There you go. Okay. All right. So, um, thank you. Sorry for the disorganized beginning. And we'll see how much we even use these sheets anyway. It may not even matter. So I want to we have the next 3 weeks we're going to look at the history of American modern Orthodoxy. That's sort of our focus, with really a focus of 3 episodes. I guess the first 2 classes will be very episodic, like one issue per class. It's going to be our orienting issue, sort of to tell a broader story. And so for this week, we're going to talk about the role that the Mechitzah played in creating the modern American Jewish denominations between 1940 and 1960. Okay, the contention is before 1940, the denominational landscape looked very different in the United States, and after 1960, as you know, it looked closer to how it does today. And Mechitzah played a pivotal role in that distinction. So we're going to tell that story, but first I want to have 2 pieces of background. And the first piece of background is I want to sort of brief overview of the academic study of Orthodoxy. Okay. Jacob Katz, a very, very prominent historian, he wrote an important book about every century of Jewish life. 2 relevant books of this is House Divided, about the emergence of Orthodoxy in Hungary and Germany in the 19th century. This is a collection of essays about his thinking about this topic. He has other books and articles on this topic. He is maybe among the most famous to claim that Orthodoxy is a response to modernity, and particularly Orthodoxy is a response to the Reform movement in 19th century Hungary and Germany, or the Reform movement in Germany, the Neolog movement in Hungary. Prior to emancipation and the Enlightenment and the emergence of Reform, there is traditional Judaism in Europe. Traditional Judaism is very different from Orthodoxy in a number of ways. Traditional Judaism is unself-conscious, meaning people just do what they do reflectively because everyone around them is doing more or less the same thing. And whereas Orthodoxy is self-conscious, right? We're making a choice to act in a certain way, knowing that there are alternatives. And therefore, Orthodoxy is characterized by a defense of what might have been considered relatively minor customs and sort of a tendency towards stringency out of this sense of being under attack, out of this sense of a traditionalism rather than actually a continuity of traditional life. Okay, and so the Reform movement begins in the 1840s, let's say, in Germany. In Hungary, there's the Neolog movement that emerges in the 19th century. These are, responses to make Judaism more modern and updated and respond to emancipation. Jews are now, the walls of the ghetto are open, and Jews are able to participate in the modern European life. And so Judaism becomes, it's ethical monotheism, or it's, some sort of a Western religion. It's a book, not in my pile of books today. It's because it's the office is called by Professor Lior Batnitsky. It's called How Judaism Became a Religion. I think the title sort of tells you the thesis, right? Religion is a concept that exists is a Protestants invented religion. Okay, it's something that's distinct from nationality and culture and language and science and philosophy. It's its own like sphere, called religion, distinct from all those other things. In the medieval mindset, all of those things were sort of merged into one. The Protestants invent religion, and then in 19th century Germany, Judaism becomes religion also, first by the Reform movement and then by the Orthodoxy as well. Samuel Hirsch turns Orthodoxy into religion as well in response to and reaction to the Reform movement. This theory of Orthodoxy has been questioned by a number of more contemporary scholars. That's the subject of this book. The introduction to this book, that's the orienting point of this book, is sort of it's a conference on Orthodoxy that took place 10 or 15 years ago, and the papers were collected. I reread the introductory essay this morning, and oh yeah, here's a picture of Jacob Katze. So he's sort of like, again, the father of the academic study of Orthodoxy. So, but these are contemporary. So this is a generation later, and they point out a few things. They point out that if Orthodoxy is a response to reform, what does that mean when most Orthodox Jews today have never met a Reformed Jew? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like the response to, or the whatever it's responding to, it can't be a response to something that was 150 years ago. Like the alternative is different. It's not the alternative is secularism. The alternative is Jewish nationalism. The alternative is some other force in different times in different places, and so you can't speak of a phenomenon being a response to something if maybe that was one particular time and place, but that's not a helpful definition moving forward. Furthermore, the self-perception of Orthodox Jews as living in continuity with the past, even as in actuality there are big changes with the past, that's not unique to Orthodoxy in the last 200 years. That's true of Jewish life always and everywhere, right? What is Midrash other than a fresh read of a canonical text, right? All of Jewish life is the story of seeing oneself into an older story. And so that's actually not really that's not distinct, it's not different. And Ravitsky argues that maybe what distinguishes Orthodox and all the different phenomena, all the different types of Orthodox and varieties of Orthodoxy is a worldview that is distinct and different from the dominant liberal understanding in which progress is good and change is assumed to be good. And the Orthodox approach is that actually we try to change as little as possible, and that we draw authority from things that are not changed and not different. And with that as a basic fundamental foundation of like a Orthodox orientation, as distinct from a modern liberal orientation, you can then speak of varieties of Orthodoxy. You can speak about more Orthodox or less Orthodox, because you have something that is like a family resemblance of that can unite to like a many diverse phenomenon with like sort of some common characteristics between them.
The contrast concept
is yeah, where like we assume that things that change is for the better and change happens, and that things are better because they're new, and that we right, and that's sort of our agenda. That's the ethos of the modern world. I mean this is sort of painting with very broad strokes, but okay. Okay, so that's one. So that's sort of like one set of like sort of be that as it may. Katz, I think, is correct in noting that under the pressures of modernity, Orthodoxy, whether it's this new phenomenon or just a different variety of something much older, is still responds to the threat of modernity by defending what might have been considered to be customs, right? And so there's a circling of the wagon, there's a drawing of boundaries, and in different places that takes different forms. So in Central Europe, we talked about this in a few months ago, right? The placement of the bima in shul was the dividing line between Orthodox and having a wedding in a shul was considered beyond the pale, right? The Orthodox Jews didn't have weddings in synagogues. And a sermon in the vernacular language, right? These were the all male choirs. These were the things that were beyond the pale and drew the boundaries. And in different places, it was different issues, but there had to be like something around which a community could define itself. The question? Yeah. Okay. All right. So now I want to, so let's talk about Mechitzah, and then we'll talk about, we'll combine these two stories. Um, the, we don't know really how far back what we would think of as a Mechitzah or gender separation in synagogues. We don't really know how far back that goes. It seems, from what I understand of the archaeology, a lot of the archaeological evidence of gender separation in synagogue life is based on assumption that Jews prayed in separate spaces. And so archaeologists maybe were overly eager to read, like, oh, this rock here, this is where the ladder to the women's balcony was in this ancient synagogue, right? There really is not that much evidence of whether there was or was not. We just don't have enough ancient synagogues, and not enough of them were preserved. I think a lot of early archaeologists assume that there was separation. I think later generations have questioned that it's based on very, very little evidence. I mean, and you see this in other archaeological questions about ancient synagogue. Have you ever seen, in the Galilee that, the mosaic with the zodiac, and there's the picture of Helios, right, the sun god, like there, and so like, what does it say about the ancient synagogue that did they like, we wouldn't necessarily think of ancient Jews as having like images of Helios, in the synagogue, but like, but we don't know. Maybe the synagogue was like a deviant sect that and this was not mainstream, or maybe they put a carpet over the mosaic whenever the rabbis came. Like, we don't really know. We don't have like 50 synagogues from that time and place to really. We have a few fragmentary, so we don't really know about the ancient synagogue. We do know that at the dawn of modernity, Jews prayed in gender separated spaces in every Jewish community that we know of. In 1800, every synagogue in the world had separate spaces for them, or women prayed in separate synagogue. There were a lot of European communities have what they called the Weiberschule, a women's synagogue, which was a separate building where women prayed. It was maybe next to the synagogue with like a little window to connect the two. There was a woman in the Weiberschule who would like lead prayers for the women in a separate building or a separate room of it, right? That was in some places in Europe, or there were balconies or some other partitions. There's very little written about Mechitzah. There's almost nothing written about it in any of the, not mentioned in the Talmud. It's not mentioned in medieval codes. It's not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not mentioned in the commentaries in the Shulchan Aruch. It gets written about in the 20th century when the custom is attacked, and then it has to be defended. And so, okay, and that's when you find writings about Mechitzah. There's one reference that I am aware of in the medieval period that is on the source sheet, which I will reshare for those who, for I guess, you joined after I shared. So there's one Hebrew source on this source sheet. Can look at the underlined part together. Where is it? Oh no, here it is. And the last source. This is from the Beit Yosef. Right, Beit Yosef is Yosef Caro's encyclopedic commentary on the Torah. The underlined part in the middle there. He's quoting the Mordechai ben Hillel, who was a 13th century German Rishon. He says, this is Hilchot Shabbat. So this is discussing what you can build on Shabbat. You can't build a tent on Shabbat. You are allowed, you have a curtain, you can close the curtain, unless closing the curtain. Okay, and he says certain types of curtains can be closed, certain types can't be, and he's discussing what type of curtains can be closed and what can't. Mutar. כגון מחיצה שעושים בשעת דרשה בין אנשים לנשים, mutar l'sotah b'Shabbat. So a mechitzah that is put up between the men and women during the time of a drasha, that is tzniut b'alma, that's merely for sake of modesty, and such a partition you can build on Shabbat. It's not making a halachic wall, which would be other types of partitions, maybe you would, okay? So the example, like Mordechai talks about that Maharam Rothenberg would he would sleep in a room with svarim, with holy books, and because he had his chamber pot in that same bedroom, he would he would have a curtain, he would cover the, uh, divide himself from where his svarim were and use his chamber pot, and he would make sure to have that curtain would be in place before Shabbat. That's a Mechitzah Materet. You can't use a chamber pot in the same room as svarim, so he would close the wall, so it's a different room. And such a wall, because it really is dividing these two domains, the place where you're using your chamber pot and the place where your svarim are, that cannot be erected on Shabbat. But for tzniut alma, just for sake of modesty, between the men and women during the time of drasha, that can be built on Shabbat. That's the Mordechai. As far as I know, that's the oldest reference. When Mechitzah gets discussed in the 20th century, there are 19th, 20th century, three major conceptions get advanced, and these are as follows. One, there's the position of the Hasidim and the Hungarians, which is the purpose of Mechitzah, is to prevent men from looking at women during tefillah. If that is your conception of Mechitzah, it has to be opaque, and ideally a balcony and a curtain. And that's how Hasidim, build Mechitzah, and the Hungarians also. One sort of modern iteration of that you can see in the Boston Rebbe Shul, at least when I was there years ago, when he was building his Hasidic center, his big shtibel, around the same time as the construction of the John Hancock Tower in Boston, and there was some problem with the windows when they first built the tower, and they had to replace many of them, maybe all of them. And the Boston Red was able to get his hands on some of those windows. They're one-way mirrors, and so the Mechitzah in the shul, it's floor to ceiling or 6 foot, 7 foot, one-way mirrors. So the women can see, they're looking through glass, and they can clear glass, they can see everything that's going on. But from the men's section, it's just a mirror. So that's one modern iteration of that Hasidic conception. But again, it's about sight, and so it needs to be opaque, at least from that perspective. The other perspective is advanced by Rav Yehuda Herzl Henkin Zatzal, who says that the Mechitzah is modeled on the Beit HaMikdash, where there was the Ezrat Nashim, the women's courtyard, where men and women were, but then there was the Ezrat Yisrael, where only men were, and then there was the Kodesh, where only Kohanim were. And the Ezrat Yisrael, the place where women weren't, was separated from the Ezrat Nashim by stairs, but it was a separate domain. So Mechitzah in a shul has to model on the Beit HaMikdash, has to be a separate halachic domain. So it has to be not just a curtain, it has to be a curtain that actually counts as a halachic Mechitzah. It has to be a barrier that would be effective for a sukkah wall. Okay, so if it's a curtain, the curtain has to go down to the floor and can't billow. You can't have a curtain that hangs from the ceiling that doesn't come at least within 3 tefachim from the floor. And if it billows too much, it wouldn't be a kosher sukkah wall, because it has to be actually separate domain. But it could be relatively short. I think it could be maybe only 10 tefachim tall if it's from the ground. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein adopts a position that Mechitzah is about kalut rosh. It's about preventing frivolity, light-hearted environment, and characterized by men and women mingling. And so the point is to prevent mingling, not to prevent sight, but to prevent mingling, which he says is about shoulder height. So he says it's about 5'4" or maybe 5'6", depending on different versions. That's the height of Mechitzah, because the purpose is not to prevent sight. The purpose is to prevent mingling. So that's his understanding. I think Soloveitchik essentially accepts that same conception, but he says it's not quite that high. I think he says 40 inches. Is 50 inches, I think, which is short.
And it could be glass.
Yeah, because it's not about sight. It could be glass, because it's totally. I think they each have advantages, different disadvantages. Each have things that would be strict implications or lenient implications, right? But those I think are the three basic ways of understanding it. Now let's talk about the story of America. Okay, so there's a story about the denominations are a phenomenon that seem to exist among Jews who live in majority Protestant countries. Jews who live in majority Muslim countries, or who live in majority Catholic or Eastern Orthodox countries, generally don't develop denominations. There's religion, which is like people know what it is, and then there are more or less religious, and then there are anti-religious or alternatives to religion. There might be even secularism, but denominations really don't, right? Just like in America, we have Presbyterians and Methodists, et cetera. If you don't like your religion, you sort of figure out the one that you like better and you create it. So too among Jews, and that phenomenon doesn't exist in Poland or the Russian Empire, right, or in the Islamic world. It's a whole different dynamic exists. So denominations develop in Protestant countries, the Reform movement, the Neolog movement in Hungary, and Orthodoxy then has its Orthodox response of trying to create boundaries. And in America, those boundaries take a little bit longer to. The Reform movement is here early, although not with long term. There are very few descendants of the earliest Reformed Jews in the United States. I think that or any of the first wave of Jews who came in certainly in the 18th century or even in the first half of the 19th century. I don't know that they
I'm a descendant
of
the Reform rabbi who came after the 1848 revolution.
Wow.
1850-ish.
Wow, kol hakavod. Okay, that's kol hakavod. Well, good. Well done for your family. Okay. Those German Jews who came after the 1848 revolution, that was the first sort of substantial wave of Jewish immigrants to the United States. They were sort of already established, like the uptown wealthier Jews, when the big wave of Jewish immigration came in between 1880 and 1914. I think most of us are descendants of the 1880 to 1914 wave, but
no, I'm
a mix of yeah. So reform was already established in the 1850s in America, but it was dominant, right? Because those were the Jews who came from Germany, and that was the ethos of the time. But the wave of immigrants who came in the 1880s were not interested in reform movement by and large, and it became a much smaller phenomenon after those wave of immigrants came. As the children of immigrants were finding more modern American synagogues, it wasn't obvious how the denominational what the lines would be, and it took several decades for that to emerge, right? So, I put a few dates here on this timeline. Like, there's there's a story. Here's the why. There's a story that the conservative movement, that the early histories of the conservative movement tell, which sees the American conservative movement as being the American descendant of the European what they call positive historical Judaism. These were academic scholars of early Judaism who sort of embraced the academic study, at least of rabbinic Judaism, rabbinic history, and saw the historical development of Judaism, and then wanted to preserve that. That's the positive historical school. It's not great. The newer and better histories, I think, don't see such a clear continuity between that European school of thought and movement and American conservative movement, because JTS is founded in 1904. Sorry, earlier. 1902 is when Solomon Schechter came to lead JTS. That was already 1902, but until through the 1920s, there are discussions about merging the Yeshiva University's rabbinical school and JTS. So there were differences, but they didn't seem to be particularly important to enough people that there were very serious negotiations about merging the institutions all through the 20s. And so the Rabbinical Assembly and the Rabbinical Council of America were both groups of American trained rabbis who were going to minister to American-born children of immigrants in a more sort of American style congregations. Sorry, is it a question?
Yeah, there's the difference in the schools. Did they just agree to disagree if they weren't aggressive on merging?
Oh, why do they fail? Yeah, so I think there were people have written about. I don't remember. There are articles written about the mergers and why they failed. I don't remember specifically if there was one sticking point that I don't recall, but I think they were. I would just say the point really is that they were close enough in their orientation and who those type of students who went there and the congregations that their graduates were serving, they were all close enough that it made sense to have this merger conversation, and yet it failed. So I guess maybe the differences were nonetheless were too important, or there are a lot of reasons why things fail. Could that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. The one second, someone just trying to join. No. Sorry.
Can I just add a personal
Yeah.
history to this?
Yeah.
My great grandfather was in the first graduating class of JTS,
Wow.
was one of the first presidents of the United Synagogues of Conservative
What was his name?
Elias Solomon.
Oh, wow. Okay. You've got like very like American Jewish royalty in this this aristocracy in this class. Very cool.
Roots.
Very neat. Very neat. Cool. Okay. So in there was a court case in the late 1920, what year was it? It was 1927, 29, the Cleveland Jewish Center court case. And then in the 50s, you have additional, in 1957, the Mount Clemens court case. You have a series of court cases that sort of raise the significance of Mechitzah as the issue that is going to really sort of be the wedge between Orthodoxy conservative Judaism in mid-century America. How these came to court? You basically had people suing their synagogues for moving to family seating, based on this claiming was a violation of the synagogue's bylaws, and these members felt they had membership rights in the synagogue. The synagogue was violating its bylaws by eliminating the Mechitzah or moving to mixed seating. And American courts heard those cases because, like, you can, it's just a contract, right? It's the bylaws of an organization. The synagogue is it's incorporated as a nonprofit organization under the laws of the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio can therefore adjudicate whether or not the synagogue is following its own bylaws. Mechitzah is a very convenient issue around which to take your synagogue to court, because it's very easy for a court to decide if it's there or not. Unlike anything else, right? If you think your rabbi's drushot are heretical, the civil court is not going to, touch that. But if you think, if a change in liturgy or a change, right, in the style of worship, the court is going to be very wary of deciding, is that orthodox or not? Is that a violation of the synagogue's bylaws? But separate seating versus mixed seating is a very black and white basic thing, and courts are willing to render judgments. And so as part of these cases, the plaintiffs gathered testimony from leading rabbis and rabbinic organizations of the day, all of which, or most of which, affirmed the necessity of Mechitzah, and that's how some of these court cases were decided. And so I think that the fact that it was something that American courts were willing, so that's like another sort of facet of American Judaism, sort of operating within the the framework of American law, that enabled it to sort of push this issue to a certain amount of prominence.
I find it interesting, Rabbi, if I
Yeah.
can interject. I'm surprised, as you were talking moments before you came to your conclusion, I was thinking that whoever was the plaintiff and did the suing in an American court was forum shopping, looking for something he or she thought, or they thought, would be a better judgment than they would get in a debate dean or something like that. And
Yeah,
yet,
so there was no possibility of. I think it even said. I think I have here on this sheet this from the JTA from 1927. Did I put it here? Is it here? I think they.
I didn't see it. I might have it, but I didn't.
No, it's not here. Sorry, it's one of the other. I think they would have. It would have been. You can't take you. It's very, very hard. Like, how would you? It's very hard to take a case like this to a beit din, because what what Beit Din, what rabbinic court would be acceptable to both sides when you're suing your rabbi, right? Like it's either his friends or his enemy. It's either the people who are going to be on your side, or the people are going to be on his side. And how could you? It's very, very hard to Beit Din it's a great mitzvah. It's a great way to solve disputes only if you identify the Beit Din long before you have the dispute. So if you're going to business with somebody, you can put into your contract, we will go to the Beit Din of America for any. You put that in when you sign your contract, and then it's there. Then if you have a dispute, you know which Beit Din to go to. But even that, there's a case. This was in the papers. That's how I know this. But there was like a shul in New York. They had an in-house caterer, right? So which means if you want to have a kiddush, not with that caterer, you have to pay. The caterer does every kiddush, and if you want somebody else to do your kiddush, you have to pay him anyway, and then you bring in your own. So it's like a symbiotic relationship between the caterer and the shul. It's not uncommon to have such an arrangement. Somehow they had a falling out, and the contract said that the Beit of America is going to be the forum that we will go to adjudicate any conflict. But the caterer said that's not fair because the rabbi of the shul is a member of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the sponsor of the Beit Din of America. So it's that I can't go to this Beit Din and get a fair trial. He felt that was his claim. So for a case like this too, there really isn't a Beit Din that would be. I don't think that would be. That really could work. So the civil courts though could work. And the synagogue is incorporated under the laws of the state of Ohio. So it's not a that's what you do, right? You're operating under the laws of the state. So like the bylaws are not. It's not a. The bylaws are a civil document, right? That govern according to the laws of the state where the synagogue is incorporated. What else to show you? Okay, so also having your source sheet, the Rabbi of Kins in Big Shul in Chicago, who says, in my opinion, that while Orthodoxy must strive to retain the tradition of separate pews wherever possible, a synagogue may still be labeled Orthodox if this is lacking, provided the other factors I outlined are present. Okay, so in the Midwest in particular, you have a lot of Orthodox shuls with mixed seating through the 50s and 60s into the 70s and 80s even. Maybe there's one, I think perhaps there's one left. There's one or two left across the country. One in Kansas City. I think there's one in Denver. I think there's one in Columbus until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But this was very, very dominant in the 40s and 50s, especially in the Midwest. So even though you had these rabbis and rabbinic organizations writing as part of these trials, you still had many dozens of synagogues in the Midwest that had mixed seating. Sometimes when YU would send rabbis to these shuls, they would say you have a year or 2 years to put in a mechitzah, otherwise you have to leave. They would tell that to the rabbis. The Skokie Yeshiva did not make that caveat, and they continued to send rabbis to mix. They were more willing and less reluctant to send rabbis in mixed seating. I have an excerpt from this guy, Baruch Litvin, who was one of the litigants, and he then collected all the materials, the court cases, and some of the letters from the rabbis. He put it all together into this one book called The Sanctity of the Synagogue. That book exists. It's the whole book is in PDF form online, so whatever, you can read it that way. Rav Soloveitchik wrote just several incredibly forceful, strident, letters about separate seating. So I think you can follow that link if you want, but or I'll read you the passage. This is on page 115 of that book, The Sanctity of the Synagogue. He says, a young man moved into a suburb of Boston where the only existent synagogue had men and women sitting together. He asked me what he should do on high holy days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Until then, on account of the mixed seating, he had not entered the synagogue, but on the days of all, he was very reluctant to remain at home. I answered him that it were better for him to pray at home both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and not cross the threshold of that synagogue. A few days later, he telephoned me again. He had met the man who was to sound the shofar in that synagogue, and this man had warned him that if he did not come to the synagogue, he simply would not hear the shofar at all. for the man would not sound the shofar again privately for his benefit. The young man practically implored me that I grant him permission to enter the edifice, at least for a half hour, that he might hear the shofar blast. I hesitated not for a moment, but directed him to remain at home. It would be better not to hear the shofar than to enter a synagogue whose sanctity has been profaned. Very strong language. Yeah, and he says a couple of reasons. He thinks biblical law requires separation. He says it's also distinguishes the ancient synagogue versus ancient churches. Christians pray together, Jews don't, although even Christians prayed separately in many places. And he says, furthermore, prayer, like the Jewish concept of prayer, he says requires an individual standing by themselves before God and not with their family. And then he again talks about the frivolity, et cetera, of people. And he says, this is it's a very, it's a very this is the hill that Orthodoxy should stand its ground and fight on. And he explains why. You can read the letter, you can read the letter if you wish yourself. I wrote several letters in the book, all to say this point.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you again, but if somebody makes a comment that Christians daven to pray together and Jews don't, how is it that hasn't it been time well established from Sinai or wherever it starts that we need a minyan to say Kaddish, we need a minyan to do Kedusha, we need a minyan to do things, or we're not supposed to say them. How do we not pray together?
Sorry. He meant, sorry. Yeah, we pray with the tzibur, the congregation, but not with your family. Not with your family. Okay. Okay. I'll read the paragraph. The entire concept of family pews is in contradiction to the Jewish spirit of prayer. Prayer means communion with the master of the world and therefore withdrawal from all and everything. During prayer, man must feel alone, removed, isolated. He must then regard the Creator as an only friend from whom alone he can hope for support and consolation. Behold, as the eyes of servants look unto the hand of their master, as the eyes of a maiden unto the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look unto the Lord our God until he be gracious unto us. Psalms 123:2. So you're right. We come together as a congregation, which is certainly fellowship and support and etc. We're not actually as individuals, but somehow there's a difference maybe between being in a room of hundreds of people as a congregation versus sitting with your family. And the kind of support and reinforcement one might get, with one's family. I would say, I don't know. I would say going to concerts with my wife, it's a lovely evening, but I also can't fully devote myself to the music because I have to make sure she's having a good time, and and we're to pay attention to her as well.
Yes.
So, like there's if you're,
Yeah.
Right, there's in terms of like. Just just in terms of where what.
I hear that loud and clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So just going back to our timeline, just to sort of see how this all played out. So 1959, this book is published, this collection of essays and letters and all that. Between 1945 and 1965, the number of conservative congregations grows from 350 to 800. Okay, so as Orthodoxy was kind of making the stand, picking the hill to die on, this is the era in which of the ascendancy of the conservative movement, from 350 to 800. This is where the children of immigrants are settling between 1945 and 1965. And during those between 1955 and 1965, I have 30 Orthodox synagogues install Mechitzah. So there were 30 synagogues that had been Orthodox with mixed seating that decided to put in Mechitzah between 1955 and 1965. In 1964, Lincoln Square Synagogue is founded as a Orthodox synagogue with mixed seating. The story is as follows. There was a fellow who was kicked out of shul. He wasn't allowed into synagogue because he didn't have a ticket in 1963. And he was so offended that this happened, he decided to form his own synagogue. And he got together a bunch of friends on the West Side, and they were going to have their own synagogue because he thought it was ridiculous that he was not allowed to enter the synagogue. The joke about the guy who doesn't have a ticket to, The usher says, you can't come in, you don't have a ticket. He begs and he pleads and he says, fine, you can come in, just don't let me catch you praying. So,
Gee.
anyway, this guy, he's going to form his own synagogue, and he thinks that if he hires an Orthodox rabbi, it's cheaper. So let's hire an Orthodox rabbi because we'll have to pay less. And so they go to Yeshiva University, who they send them. And this university, Rabbi Riskin at the time was a young teacher, and they say, you go, you'll be the rabbi, but you can't move to the neighborhood where the synagogue is. You have to, until they put in a mechitzah, and you can't pray with him. So he lived uptown. He spent Shabbat on the west side, staying in a hotel or in people's homes. He davened early, and he was the rabbi of this congregation. And they had high holiday services with mixed seating in 1964. At some point within a year or so, and certainly by the time they built their building, he had convinced them to put in a mechitzah, and that's what happened. 1969, Rabbi Avi Weiss was in Krevkor congregation in St. Louis. They had a system where if you wanted a mechitzah, you would take like a little piece of cardboard and stick it in the armrest between you and the person next to you, and you can put another one, I guess, over. And that's what they did, but there was no real separation. Rabbi Weiss was there for a year or so, and then and that was like the condition in which he went. And when the congregation wouldn't agree to put him pizza, he left and came back to New York and had the rest of his career in New York, just as like sort of interesting milestones. So I want to say, it's like two things I want to say sort of about this chapter in history. Like, I guess a plus and a minus of this moment. On the plus side, I think boundaries are important. And when people couldn't see the difference between Orthodoxy and conservative Judaism, as they had rabbis who practiced Judaism very similarly, and they had congregations that practiced very similarly, and the differences that were observable seemed kind of minor. It's sort of helpful for identity. It's helpful for kind of being able to have a cohesive community, to have red lines. And so the existence of a red line that could be clearly determined, I think, was very important for the future success of Orthodoxy. Another sort of positive outcome of this becoming the red line, or a red line, is that it was indeed countercultural in America of the 50s and 60s to pray in this way. Family pews were certainly in keeping with the spirit of mid-century America. And by doing something, by kind of throwing, I don't know what the word, by requiring people to do something countercultural, to affiliate, you kind of got the people who are the most, you got very committed people. And so as this sorting is taking place, to go to the Orthodox synagogue entails doing something a little bit counterintuitive, or countercultural, going against the grain of the American ethos. So the people who made that shift were going to be people who are particularly willing to do that. So you end up getting like you have smaller numbers, but maybe you're getting the people who are more committed. It's like I think there's like an economics theory about this, about like somebody is, if you're selling, you have two ice cream stands. One sells ice cream in small size, one sells ice cream in a big size. So you think the ice cream stand that's selling smaller size servings of ice cream will be more successful, because you'll get the people who don't really like ice cream as much. They'll get the smaller scoops. But actually, who are your base? Your base is people who really love ice cream. And so the one that's going to be successful is the one that is serving the big scoops of ice cream. Okay. So too with religion. This is why more demanding religions have done much better in the last 100 years, last 50 years, right? Because who's your base? Who are the people who are going? The people they love, these mitzvot. They love this lifestyle, and those are your base. And so if you cater to them, like you'll attract the people who really love your product, okay, as it were. So I think that's I guess that's a twist on this, right? If you have a sorting mechanism that entails getting people who are willing to do something countercultural to be affiliating, then that is you're seeding your congregation with very committed people. On the negative side, this Orthodoxy between 1940 and 1960 lost like hundreds of congregations, and a generation of American Jewry stopped affiliating Orthodox, right? That this was, so it's hard to say, it's hard to speak of a success when you have, again, millions of immigrants came to America. They or their parent, like with Orthodoxy was in some ways well primed to serve them and to convince them to affiliate with Orthodox congregations, and by and large, it didn't in those decades. So, really, every question, every decision made, every choice point has to be evaluated. Like, did it turn out well or not? Second, I think there's an inverse relationship between identity and content. Okay, the weaker the content, sometimes the more we focus on our identity as a label and external markers of identity, and the more we like defend the border of those, and those boundary, when we police against boundary violations. For example, like I think Shabbat is very strong in contemporary Orthodoxy, and so it doesn't end up being, we don't obsess about who's in and who's out, red lines in community outside based on Shemirat Shabbat, because people do things that people do things that are right or wrong, but like it's not threatening, because we have a real sense intuitively, deeply, of what Shabbat is supposed to look like in our lives and our families' lives. Whereas I don't know that we have like a great articulate a positive vision of what it means to be a Jewish woman or a Jewish man in contemporary. And so therefore, in the absence of like being able to articulate content, we instead switch over to, well, it's about identity. We're Orthodox, and this is what an Orthodox congregation looks like. This is how Orthodox Jews pray, without any content. There's no positive, right? There was very little positive. So Soloveitchik tries in his writings to articulate a positive vision of a theory of prayer, what it's about. There's a positive articulation of preserving the traditions of our ancestors. It's a positive vision of modeling our synagogue life on the Beit HaMikdash, which had different sections. But I don't know that we know what it means to be a Jewish woman, or I don't know what it means to be masculinity, femininity. I think are categories that I think don't have as much content to them right now. And so instead, we obsess about boundary and identity. I think it troubles me that the overwhelming majority of like fraught conversations that I've been a part of or observed in the last 15 years about the boundaries of Orthodoxy are about gender and sexuality, and especially what women do in public and when and where, right? That to me is troubling, because it's not that those questions aren't important, but just that it's a 80-90% of the like these sort of fraught conversations about boundaries end up being about this small handful of topics. And I think it's a sign not of strength, but of kind of weak. There's a hollowness perhaps that we're compensating. We're compensating for not really knowing what content to fill by so that's all I guess where this I feel it sets the seeds for like the things that were to come in the decades that followed, right? Like a sorting, right, of into well-defined denominations by 1960 that really was not there in 1940, and a sorting that primed Orthodoxy to be seated with, populated by some of the most committed Jews in America, but also already setting the grounds for so many of our boundary definitions and boundary defenses to be on a very limited series of topics focused on gender and sexuality in a way that I think isn't always healthy. Okay, yeah.
Isn't the origin of the split between TI and Ohev about separate seating?
I don't know. What's the
I
story you
think-
heard? Yeah.
I think that downtown, it was one congregation. And when they moved up here, I might be wrong, when they moved up here, there was controversy over whether
Mm,
there would be family seating or
Oh, wow.
separate seating, and that is where the,
Fascinating. Yeah, I don't know.
They
I
branched
don't.
off.
I don't know. That's a good question. I do not know the history of. And Josh, I guess, had to go already, so he'll tell us some other time. So I don't know. But that's that's not that could be that such things happened. In
it was 1964, I think, so that's right around.
yeah,
right-
it
right
could be.
time.
It's very possible. So maybe could have been an Orthodox synagogue with mixed seating before, and then they moved here, they put a Mechitzah in, or maybe it was an Orthodox sitting with a Mechitzah, and then they wanted to take it out, and so they had to become a conservative synagogue in the 60s. That's totally possible. I don't know. In Europe, in some places, these divisions were over, not nothing. There were over things that these once these categories exist, the divisions are taken very, very seriously. Okay, like two quick stories. I don't know, never mind. I don't have time to tell this. I'll tell these stories next time, okay? Because it's 9 o'clock. But I'll
Please,
see
yeah.
you next time with two stories, okay? About
Oh,
the
I have a question.
what? I'm
I have
sorry.
a question.
Oh, please ask your question. Yeah.
Okay, I was wondering if you have any thoughts about what might be today's countercultural tendencies in Orthodoxy that are performing that same sort of function that you talked about.
That's so interesting. I think I definitely want to talk about that in the third week. I'll give you, I think there was like a brief moment where I thought that maybe the refusal to entirely pivot to Zoom Tefillah and Zoom Minyanim was like maybe a possibility of like a positive, like Orthodox, distinctive insistence on in-person prayer. Obviously not when it's dangerous, but that even when it's not safe to pray together, we just won't say Kaddish, and we'll just because some things are more important, but we're not going to allow a minyan to be convened without actually being in proximity. I thought that was a really I think the liberal movement's embrace of Zoom, I think, has been devastating to their vitality. And I think Orthodoxy's insistence on doing things in person, I think, is countercultural. It's similar. I mean, it's similar to not driving on Shabbat. It's the next step in that. Like, it's an insistence on being proximate to people and institutions, and that community requires proximity. So I think
Yeah, I mean, I think Shabbat is very countercultural as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. But we'll continue. So we'll talk about that next week and the week after that. Okay. We'll continue this. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good
Sure.
night.
Thank you. Good night. Go ahead.